Okay. Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. I'm always blown away by the incredible support that we get from everybody about Baldur's Gate 3. How many, show of hands, how many of you guys have played it? Thank you so much. I'm Jason Latino, Cinematic Director at Larian Studios. I'll try not to talk too fast, but I did not think about how many people would be in this room with me when I was talking. This will be a top-down look at our bottom-up approach to cinematics on Baldur's Gate 3. I imagine many of you are here to figure out how we put so many cinematics in the game. We went from making Divinity Original Sin 2 with no cinematics to making all of the cinematics. And we'll get there. But first, things being the way they are in this year, I want to address the layoffs. I have no great wisdom. I have not much to offer on this topic, but I will say a bit of optimism. I did take this job off of a 6-month layoff. I think I kept track, which is maybe a good or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. And I think I applied for and interviewed for about 67 jobs before getting this one. Track your actions anywhere that you apply for. Keep track of that on the date that you applied for it. Figure out if you know anybody at that studio. If you just put your application into a web portal, figure out, go on LinkedIn, see if there are any recruiters that you can find. Reach out to them. Anything that you can make some noise. And with the recruiters, don't ghost them. Sometimes they're busy people too, and they're also working with hiring managers that are also busy. Sometimes poking them helps them poke them. You get it. So everybody's juggling a lot. On with the show. Back to cinematics. There's a lot of what we do with cinematics that is like other cinematic pipelines. I'm going to focus on the things that are different about what we do. We still have story. We still go into previs for some of our scenes, and we iterate until it looks great, and we're happy with it, so you guys can be happy with it. The format of this talk, there'll be a couple cycles. It'll take you a while to catch on, maybe. But we're going to talk about what was the initial vision when we started. What did we think it would take to make cinematics? What were the problems that we discovered with those initial ideas? And we'll go through a couple of those. And then we'll move to a new vision. How do we adapt? How do we recover from those bumps along the road? And what were the new wrinkles that were introduced from our new, cool, clever ideas? And then some resolutions, one that'll be for the project and our general approach to cinematics, and kind of a personal note for myself. Start on a personal note, end on a personal note, you get a personal sandwich. The initial vision, there were kind of 4 main things when I went back to look at all my documents from 2019 to figure out, okay, where was my head at before this whole thing shook the world, right? Flexible cinematics. I describe cinematics to a lot of people, which was less helpful in Europe, it turns out, as peanut brittle, because they don't make it over there very much. It's toffee. It tastes great, but it shatters into a million pieces when you try to bend it into a different shape. So if you take a line that's good here and move it over here, suddenly, if you just jammed it into your timeline tool, or you've jammed it into Maya, your whole sequence is broken, and you kind of have to start over from scratch sometimes. So how could we avoid that? We didn't want to make the game smaller. Divinity Original Sin 2, and that's a mouthful, so I'm going to call that DOS 2 for the rest of the presentation, had about 54,000 lines of dialogue that were delivered in what would be considered, what cinematics would consider an interactive dialogue for BG3. There's much more writing in the game, but that was how we were determining what did we actually have to support. And we didn't want that number to go down. I didn't want to be the guy that came on and ruined Larian games. Nobody would. Muppet acting. So this is, I talk a lot about a lot of weird stuff. So Muppet acting. There's this weird kind of story from, I think it's Chuck Jones, talking about watching The Muppet Show for the first time. And he was just angry at how easy it was for Jim Henson to connect with his audience through just syncopated motions, bouncing up and down, and flapping the gums at the right times along with the words. And that created infinitely relatable characters of Kermit and Fozzie the Bear and Miss Piggy and all of them. The reason that I'm mentioning that about a video game is we knew that we were going to mocap our entire VO pipeline to hide the NPC-ness. And this was going to amount to the largest pile of animation that was going to go into our game. And if we agonized over art directing all of that animation, it was just going to stop us in our tracks. So we had to basically figure out, like, what are we actually looking for? And what we're looking for is a simulacrum of life. We wanted to capture the idiosyncrasies of the actors themselves rather than, and just worry about, are they working on the level of a Muppet? Are they a believable person? Rather than, are they the exact right person to deliver this quest line all the time? We had to pick and choose our battles. And then grounded tone. We wanted to adjust a little bit of the storybook. We still had a narrator that we brought over from DOS 2, but it had to work on a personal and cinematic level. So this is kind of where the loop starts, guys. Flexible cinematics. This is our initial victory was this, is we came up with scene templates that would stamp out cinematics anywhere. And I got this really good advice one time when I was looking at getting into watercolors by a guy named Derek Stratton, amazing artist, amazing art director. And he said, paint with the broadest brush possible, which is not saying always paint with a broad brush, but paint with the broadest brush possible. Whatever the part of the job that you're doing, use the broadest tool. So what was that for cinematics? And for us, it was basic staging for basic conversations. There's only so many ways that two people can stand and talk and look at each other, and figuring out how to turn that into an infinite snowflake of possibilities was not going to be great. So we figured out how to templatize our basic conversation setups. And this allowed us to also standardize where our cameras were going to be and how they could respond and kind of deal with all the height variations. If they just had to deal with the height variations of being a half orc or a half ling, we didn't have to worry about finding them in the horizontal axis as well. And this also established an inherited authorship. We had something where we could change a few template files, and then we could watch those changes ripple across the entire game. So I'll explain how this falls into the pipeline. We have our dialogue file. We have writers. They're working on story authorship. They're writing the lines of dialogue and the order of the lines of dialogue and all of the intricate spiderweb paths through those dialogues. And then we have these scene templates. I want to skip over that for a second because this is where this is kind of what's different about us. The timeline file, this is where a lot of people get into Maya or directly into some sort of in-tool cinematic thing. If you go directly from the dialogue file into that timeline level, the blue level, everything is brittle. Everything is bespoke. Every last moment is custom. So what we did is we introduced this scene template. It took care of character staging and took care of camera setup, and it gave us a safety net of authorship that we could bank on. And it also allowed us to have a reliable line of action so that we could organize our actors and how they were standing when they were recording in the booth. The timeline file, this is where we would start, we kind of have our cinematic teams set up in two different teams. And it does take pretty much the entire company to make cinematics, but two main teams, we have cinematic artists, and they are focused on the timing, acting, pacing, custom work, and implementing assets from VFX, sound effects, and all this kind of stuff, and bringing in especially the animations from our wonderful cinematic animation team. So it's kind of an implementation timeline. And then we have the game itself, which places these timeline files into specific areas of Faerun that make up the story of Baldur's Gate. Initial problems with flexible cinematics. Top-down games don't have horizon line, folks. So our cinematics could play everywhere, but not everywhere was designed for viewing at eye level. We had short draw distances at first. We had one-sided textures, odd decoration placement, floating scenery, and visual scripting asylums where somebody just said, well, we'll put these over here. No one will ever see these over here. Well, if you look at the bottom right, We did see them. And so we had this game where you could talk to all of your companions. You could click on them anywhere in the world. And suddenly our top-down game turned into a third-person game. And we had to figure out what this meant for our art pipelines and our level design best practices. Oh, I forgot a bullet point. Ceilings. Ceilings are not a thing in a top-down game. That became very important to Baldur's Gate 3. Initial victories. Back to victories. I like talking about victories. Confirmation by a negative. It seemed that we were moving pretty fast, but we didn't have any writing estimates, Sven, and we didn't know if we were moving fast enough. We had about a year to achieve, we achieved shipping level results, but the in-game cinematic tools were irreducibly complex. If you're starting up a cinematic program, you kind of need your entire feature set working before you know if you have anything. Before that, it's just you need acting to know what you're shooting, and then you need all of this stuff kind of working at once. So it took a while to get all that stuff online. Initial problems about not making games smaller. There were no small scenes at first, for sure. Casual conversations would have complications. We have this bard, Alfira, in the game, and her conversation took more effort than her song of singing this magical song to the woodland creatures. And I'll show you on the next slide kind of why that was. But to a certain degree, that was by design. It keeps the players on their toes when they can't tell whether or not they're on the golden path. And it encourages exploration. If every nook and cranny of this world can have crazy things where you can just talk to a squirrel and then kick it into a tree, and the guy who storyboarded that is right over there. So you would think that we spend all our energy working on this and making sure all the, we were making real chords with the fingers and all that kind of stuff. And we spent a lot of time on that because we cared about it, and we knew players would too. But this is really what we spent our time on, making sure that there weren't continuity mistakes, because we had this really wonderful dialogue tool that would allow you to take these nonlinear paths through this, getting to know this person, getting their baggage as an artist, which seems really personal now while I'm on stage. But making sure that her guitar was always in the right position no matter what path you played through the dialogue file. So we had to figure out how to communicate this to a writing team and scripting team and figure out how we could create a shared language for, we'd rather work on this, but right now we're spending a lot of energy on this. Initial victories, Muppet acting. We got so much characterization from our actors. We initially got kind of some paddle hands, and then we adapted to stretch sense. Thank you, Ricardo, for finding them. And then we started getting a lot of finger gestures that you're seeing Gail do here. And then the cinematic team actually authored a lot of we did body capture, but we didn't do facial capture. So the cinematic team, you can see, place these cute little emojis around and time that out so we could basically go from different intensities of different emotions, and that would interface with the face effects and lip sync. And what we found is that when we were placing all these intended contextual timings of these emotion keys, we didn't need some of the extra bells and whistles of that really deep tool set. So we have Happy A, B, and C. Happy A, B, and C here, and everybody loves Gail. Happy A, B, and C, you'll notice these are closed-lipped, and that they are also, they kind of go up in intensity. So Happy A is the least amount of happy that somebody could be. Happy Z is the most amount of happy, but you'll notice X, Y, and Z are all open-faced. So A, B, what's the difference here? When we didn't have the entire alphabet, that would be too many choices to make for every frame of dialogue. So we had A, B, and C as a set, and then X, Y, and Z. So the A, B, and C would all work with phonemes. X, Y, and Z wouldn't, or X, Y, and Z if you're in the UK. And then you can kind of see the bottom row, we have a bunch of other emojis that we could just look at a glance and kind of roughly tell on our timeline tool what emotion somebody was in and where we could change our authorship. Initial problems with Muppet acting. Look-ats and mocap. So when you mocap every line of dialogue in your game, you're baking in their whole performance. And you don't, the VO team, the direction team, as informed as they are, and all the great information that we put into our dialogues, they don't always know if you're talking to an ogre or if you're talking to a mouse. So they can't, and in some cases it could be either. So they can't direct the actor all the time. Or if the actor, we moved them from directing their attention to an iPad on a music stand next to them. They had a head mic, and they were looking at a teleprompter, and they were treating that as their acting partner. But what if they were talking to multiple people? They can't look away from the teleprompter, because then they don't know what to say. So we needed more flexibility, and we needed to give our artists control over what the head was doing. But we initially, when we started making this look-at tool, it nuked all of the wonderful head bobbing and Muppet acting that we were trying to get. So we had to incorporate this on an additive layer. Problem solved. We actually did fix it eventually, but YouTube, you know what you did. Initial victories. Grounded tone. Our CGI trailers served as excellent tonal pieces. Working with Unit Image was a highlight of the project for me personally. They are brilliant collaborators. You should work with them unless I'm working with them, and then you wait your turn. Their PBR style really provided some aspirational targets for us as we were building out our own art style and our own world, and there was a lot of collaboration on what we thought we could do and the assets they would provide. I think there was even some sharing of assets back and forth. This also cemented body horror as a tool. Everybody who learned something about themselves when that tadpole went into Lae'zel's eyes, you're welcome. Later on, when Orin, we were introducing this shapeshifter character, we knew that, well, this could just be a normal, like, Mystique X-Men kind of UV scroll, or we could do something a bit more interesting. And it also let us know, with our narrative tone, we knew how dark we could go. Here's some side-by-side comparisons of what Unit gave us and some similar things where we could test the lighting, we could test the rendering, we could test the materials and all that sort of stuff, camera angles, and figure out how we could kind of chase after the excellent images that they gave us and introduced our IP to you guys with. And we started with that wonderful Seraphomosis in fast speed teaser, and then we have Orin later on with this kind of body cracking motion. And we could use these because it rhymed and it felt right. Initial problem with grounded tone. There were some old habits. Scenes were always not written with visuals in mind back in 2019. So Asterian's initial recruitment scene was him actually in one of those pods because he was a vampire and he was afraid to come out in the daylight. So you're trying to talk to him whether or not the sun was out. And this makes a lot of sense, and it offers really good role play. But if you look at that lower image, you're just looking at a screen. You're not looking at a person. There's nothing to connect with. There's not any emotion that you're getting from that pod. Even romance scenes for some. I remember having a conversation with one of the writers early on. I was like, is this romance scene, did they find a haystack somewhere? Is there a hotel nearby? Where exactly is this happening? And it kind of dawned on us at that point, which was like there was information that never had to be thought about before. So we added a cinematic context field in our dialogue editor for talking about what was narrative information that the player needed to know, but the developers definitely needed to know first. What was non-verbal information that was telling the story? And they took to this fantastically. So we got all of that, and we hit our very first impasse, and it goes back to our core principle of flexible cinematics. We wanted scripted motion. We wanted scripted movement for our cinematics so they could be one-to-one, so that our cinematics were happening exactly where the gameplay characters were standing. And movement would be driven by go-to commands, and minor staging changes would be handled by gameplay locomotion. The results were interesting. I'm going to talk over this because it's the only way I can feel comfortable. You can see, so like actually, laughter helps too. We're actually, like, there's not even like an auto continue on this stuff. So there's somebody who's like clicking continue every time we get to the end of one of these shots. I remember this was like 2 weeks of work. He's standing this thing up, and I went back home that day, and I was like, I might have made a huge mistake. I don't know about this. The look-ats, folks. But you see a floating waterfall right there. Like almost everything that we have talked about is on display right here, which is why I'm putting you all through my trauma. So this, but you can see a lot of things that are working. There's a lot of the art assets that are being used. You can see the beginning of the material system. We would improve the lighting and all that sort of stuff. This next shot coming up is interesting, I think. Maybe it's 2 shots from now, probably after we get an error message. Wait for the error message, hold. There we go. That's the sweet stuff. This custom movement right here, we didn't actually know if the goblins would be on the screen because their AI could send them anywhere. And it was pretty difficult, guys. It was time to find a plan B. So what do? We implemented cinematic dummies. Not like that. Cinematic dummies for us were timeline entities that would replicate their in-game counterparts and hide them. So this allowed us to show the players a cool cinematic without actually disrupting the game state at all. This kept the cinematic or the cinematic tool as an artist tool instead of a scripting tool. It cut down on animation blends because not everything had to work from 360 degrees. And it allowed us to cheat things. As a cinematic storyteller, if you want to, somebody walk from one end of the hall to the other end of the hall, you don't want to show that whole journey. If you're using scripted motion, you have to do that. The results would take fairly quick for tech. I think they anticipated the need for change. And then pipeline authorship and all that kind of stuff would take months. The results would get us here.
Open the bloody gate! Nobody gets in! Zevlor's orders! That pack of goblins will be on us.
So you can see, Aridin, we changed him, but there's a lot of these shots that are very similar if you've played this moment in the game. There's kind of some blinking out that you'll see that some of the characters doing at the end of shots. That was a problem with our animation export. We slowly got to fix that. You can already see the materials look way better than they did a few months ago. The sound team really brought it. We got music in here. It was really important for me that we nailed this scene, even though it's just kind of like this transitionary beat in the story itself. We spent a lot of time on this. You'll see this wheel kind of screw around. Yeah, that arrow is really tiny because the animation was changing the render scale. But we felt like we were there. We felt like we had impact. We felt like we were connecting with this moment. For everybody who says that they say form a line and then 2 people walk off, leaving the 3rd person behind, I'll point out that you only need 2 points in a line. This was great. We were all set. Nothing could stop us now. 1 month later, we were all sent home and locked away and working remotely. I'm not going to turn this into a COVID talk. I will say that I got to know all the neighborhood kiddies, and I played a lot of D&D with my friends on the internet. What this did give us was time to think and recognize that we actually accomplished our kind of initial goal of flexible cinematics, not making the game smaller, Muppet acting, and grounded tone. And then COVID slowed down the writing pipeline a little bit, and that gave us time to evolve the team and pivot. And our team was very, very junior heavy. Lots of folks, that was their first first job out of college in general, and very many their first job in games. But they weren't the new kids on the block anymore. They were growing into developers instead of just timeline jockeys. So what was the evolving vision? So we needed to start targeting final quality. What we had gotten to with that plea of the gate sequence that I just showed you, we had to spread that out a little, get more of those in the game. We wouldn't have EA to hide behind forever. We had to maintain the floor. Most of our game cinematics, most of that 174,000 million hours of cinematics was going to be conversational. It was going to be it was going to be a conveyance of information to the player about what effect they can have on the world, what effect they have had on the world, and where they can affect the world next. That had to feel good. We couldn't take those scenes for granted. We had to collaborate to shape. We had to provide a new team identity for our cinematic team and model how their role at the studio could change and how they could evolve outside of just their ever-changing timeline tool. We had to focus fire on the ceiling. And the hardest part about that was figuring out where the ceiling was. And we'll get to more on that later. And then we had to solve lighting. The majority of the game, we only had 1 or 2 lighting artists internally. And there were a lot of cinematics. Victories. Maintaining the floor. We had time with the production slowdown to revisit all of our scene templates and kind of drag those characters closer together. The party makeup is really important to players. It's an expression of what characters they value in combat and who they're romancing. And getting them in the background of player decision and question shots was really important for us. And tighter staging allowed for more visible companions, and also left a smaller footprints for gameplay cinematics so they could play closer to that game state that we were chasing initially. It also established a baseline. We had these scene templates, but when we started looking at it, we had a lot more than we thought we did because people were just making a bunch of custom ones to do a lot of slight variations. And so we figured out, OK, well, what are the best decisions? And then how do we homogenize those and then set them up into a proper hierarchy that would then get all of that inheritance actually working for us? Involving problems with maintaining the floor. Some scenes didn't fit our templates. Wild Shape would double as a Speak with Animals spell. And we couldn't support all of the cute animals in our cinematics, because you could be a giant badger, or you could be a giant spider, or you could be a giant ox. Or, I mean, the cat was small, but most of them felt pretty giant to me. Mid-development, we kind of opted for just keeping the player off camera during these. You guys didn't seem to mind much. Thank you so much. We're still toying with how we can handle that better. Evolving victories, collaborate to shape. So there are 2 columns on here. We have execution and broader tasks. Execution is kind of what I told people the job was going to be when I hired them. It's moving around cameras and characters and editing facial performances and all that kind of stuff. The broader tasks were things that were emerging as we were making the game. We were understanding the drama. We were advocating for fidelity. If this was a gold scene, we had this kind of tiered system, bronze, silver, brass, gold, bronze, brass, silver, gold. There you go. Owning kickoff meetings, kind of collaborating, bundling information and context for everybody to do their work. Advocating for asset reuse. If we had somebody jumping off of a platform, we didn't need to mocap that again, and the cinematic team would know this, and they could communicate this. They could refactor old workflows like those scenes, and then that would have broad effect on the entire game, incorporating new workflows and new features that were coming on the tool all across production. And they would escalate technical and narrative issues when we were trying to get things into the game that just wouldn't work with our tool set. So we chopped all of these things up, and we figured out that these were actually pillars of expertise. So we have analysis. How well is the assignment understood? That's understanding the drama. Ideation. How strong are your visual goals? Strategy. How clear is your plan of action? Execution, we all know and love. And revision. How quickly does your work achieve polish? And we turned this into a bit of an HR grid, performance and development, all that kind of stuff. But the important thing for us was that, yes, working in the timeline tool is really important. Telling a story is very, very important. But collaborating and fitting into the rest of the company at large and spreading that context, spreading that passion is a majority of what your identity is as a team. That worked very well. There's actually no downside to that. So more victories. Focus fire on the ceiling. So this will be a long walk. We'll get there. Just bear with me. Cinematic context, we explained, that's visual information, nonverbal information that we need to communicate to developers so they can put it on screen later. Each line of dialogue is represented by a node in our dialogue editor. I'll show you in a little bit. This added field for visual information was used also for making our mocap shot lists. And it was very easy to do a quick export and kind of read and say, it's like, yes, this context needs new animation. No, this context doesn't need new animation. Once writing got up to speed, we suddenly had more work than we could review. It felt like we could either read the dialogue files or we could make cinematics, but we couldn't do both. And that was really, really daunting. We needed a way to prioritize our most complicated scenes without having to read them. This is where we came up with the idea of custom nodes. We added a toggle so that we could count the nodes with cinematic context. We then had this idea of dialogue fidelity. It's a gold dialogue file, right? And then we had these context nodes, and we married the two. So one custom node, or a node with cinematic context, in a gold dialogue would become one gold node. And so we could look at, if we had 20 gold dialogue files, and one of them had more gold nodes than the other ones, we knew to read that one first, because that either needs scoping or that needed to get into the pipeline as fast as possible. And we could also, and this is kind of oddly enough, with the game being so big, data was on our side. There were trends. There was an aggregate truth. Most of the time, we spend time agonizing over our JIRAs and task flows and all this kind of stuff to figure out what is the specific truth. But suddenly, we discovered there was an aggregate truth. We could find a ratio of how many custom nodes in a gold dialogue file would result in the ask of a new animation asset. So we could predict not only what was going to be most expensive, but how many animation assets that might require. And so we could then prioritize the cinematic animation team. And that's I think, moving on. So we have the dialogue tool. We have, this is the same dialogue file you'll see on the top and in the middle there. We also highlighted our custom nodes. So you'll see there's a lot of these like little green nodes. We made a joke that a bronze dialogue file would have no green nodes in it, so you had to get in there and wipe the boogers if they were there. We have 99 nodes in this dialogue file. 71 of them would be timeline nodes. They would generate visuals in some way. There was a line of dialogue or there was something that needed to happen. So that meant there were 22 nodes on here that are logical, or they're display options for your branching paths and all that kind of stuff. But 24 nodes would be custom nodes. And this is where we actually had to spend our time. They were more likely to take more time from our team as cinematic artists or more time from the cinematic animators. And we could focus on those. And now, when we open a dialogue file, we knew that essentially I was going to spend all my time on the green nodes, and I could let the scene template take care of the yellow nodes. We knew where to read, because not everything was bespoke, not everything was custom. Evolving problems, solving lighting. So it was a big game, 2 lighting artists. This was not by design. We did try much recruiting. It's a very high demand role, and we found that adjacent industries didn't translate as well in our efforts. TV and film just don't have to deal with, you could throw 50 lights onto a scene in TV and film because you're doing offline rendering, and that just wasn't working in a game engine. Our proprietary workflow was not outsourcing friendly, so we couldn't just go hire a bunch of extra hands to chew through the work. And we had an auto lighting solution for early access, but it didn't handle movement. People, the moment they moved, they would step out of the light, and they would be in darkness. So we built this massive backlog of super time-consuming work that needed to happen in the game. I chose this example because you can see, even though we have VFX that emit some amount of light, you can really see the difference between an unlit scene and a beautifully lit scene. So we came up with this idea of light linking. So we initially, for early access, you can kind of see it in that middle area. There's the green line and the red line. Those are binary keys. We're toggling on and off the lights. We had to do this for every light, for every camera, all across. We had to turn it on for this shot and then turn it off for the next shot, and it was maintenancing. And God forbid, you might actually have to change the length of that shot, which happened a lot, and then you would have to move all those keys, and it created a lot of bugs. The maintenancing was kind of nuts. And then we finally kind of looked on the same screen up, and then there's that little block area above there with all those little kind of buttons right next to the time code. And that's the shot activation track. That was, this camera is turning on now, and then it changes over to this camera. And it's like, wouldn't wouldn't it be great if we just put light activation in with the camera activation, and this concept of light linking was born. It was very intuitive, and it saved massive amounts of time. And it suddenly kind of led us to realize that we had two buckets of lighting work. We had bulk light linking, and we had custom work. And remember those scene templates? The scene templates that every dialogue in the game, every cinematic in the game used and referenced? What if we could throw our lights in there? And this was a very, we kind of got lucky, because what this allowed us to do is we could take all of these scene templates and we could light them for every different environment in the game. And it was a lot of work, but it was a finite amount of work. We could put our standard lights, do all the linking for all the standard cameras that were in those template files, and do our color authorship there. And then on the timeline layer, we only had to do the custom work, where people were moving, where they were stepping out of their lights. And it was like we figured out a way to infect the game with lighting authorship, rather than just doing it the way that you would normally do it. And then we had the game, which was essentially selecting what colors the lights needed to be. Here's an example. For Valentine's Day, we released more kissing. Everybody loves more kissing. And we put that in our in-party dialogue. So you can talk to one of your companion characters and get a little peck on the cheek or more. And the lights would respond to wherever you were. Even though it was the same timeline file, the scene file could be swapped out on the back end, and we could infect the game with very, very cool lights that fit the mood of the environment around you. So, project takeaways. What worked? Inherited authorship. Those scene templates really saved our bacon, not just with getting cinematics done, but getting lighting done. And it gave us a lot of standard cameras and all that sort of stuff. The VO mocap pipeline it provided a tremendous amount of characterization and really helped, I think, the players connect with the amazing actors, both in the game and on Twitter. And then scaling the team's expectations to you're not just an artist toiling away on your timeline file. You are participating in informing the processes that are happening around you. And then using data-prioritized vetting. The one thing that is never out of date is P4. I mean, unless somebody leaves a file checked out over the weekend. That never happens, though. But when you go into Jira and you spend so much time fretting about these tracking algorithms and this kind of stuff, you can get out of sync with some of your systems. But if you're just looking at the raw data, if you can just look at this dialogue file has 3 lines of dialogue that don't have a WAV file connected to them, and use that for your tracking, it's constantly telling you what work it needs you to do. What didn't work? Golden path scoping. This is typically what you do. Is, this is important to the game, so we won't spend any money on it. Well, that wasn't going to work. That de-incentivized the exploration that we wanted to achieve. And then one-to-one cinematics is still stings, but we adopted our cinematic dummies, and the game looks good, but I still want another crack at this. I'm going to get personal for a second. Personal takeaways. Kill your darlings. So this is a phrase that's used for storytellers. You eliminate all the parts of the story that you love, but you cannot justify, and what remains are the stories or the moments that actually serve your story. This, over the course of Baldur's Gate 3, is what I did with my job. I loved storyboarding, and I got storyboard artists. I loved working with the team and making their shots better, and I took a lot of that and handed that off to my leads. I loved doing mocap shoots and working with actors, and I hired a performance director who's now our head of animation, and I hope you saw his talk earlier because he did a fantastic job earlier. And what remained were director tasks. What remained was unblocking these people so they could do their jobs. And I'll read off one of these quotes at the bottom of the screen from Lae'zel. Go ahead. Thank you. I'll try a Lae'zel impersonation here. It's it must be said, because of you, I still breathe. Because of you, I still battle. I am not one to show gratitude, but ahem. Thank you. I had a new vision for vision. I thought being a cinematic director was about me delivering the story, and that is what I had worked my career toward, was trying to chase this auteurism, which at this point sounds more like a disease to me. And instead, it was removing obstacles so my team could deliver the story. And that's the bottom-up approach. My raw material wasn't the story. My raw material was ambiguity. And my goal was processing this into clarity. And the clarity meant that my team could focus on storytelling. Thank you so much. You've all been a wonderful audience. I also want to thank Ash Jameson, who did all the wonderful little Lae'zel headshots that I put out, those funny little quotes that you can find on the vault later. I'm sure I said a lot of weird, confusing things, so let's do Q&A.
Hi, great presentation, thank you. How did you solve the ceiling problem?
The ceiling problem? That would be a GDC talk of its own. It was the art team, yeah, I mean, they basically just bailed me out on that one. But I'm not going to claim to know what they did.
All right, thanks.
They made the ceilings show up. I'm sorry.
Hello, wonderful talk. Thank you for that. At one point, you mentioned that your team was a lot like junior heavy. So how did you guys approach making the product, but also like teaching the juniors to become better professionals, but the product wouldn't also, kind of suffer in quality because, well, people don't know what they're doing?
So we focus very heavily. We have a pretty tough skills test. And what I would look for, especially because I knew we were going to take this template approach with those scene templates that I talked a lot about. It minimized where people that are learning the pipeline and learning the cinematic rules could actually damage, the vision. And this left me open to just looking for people who could take notes well. I often gave feedback on the skills test, and I wouldn't ask them to redo the whole thing, but I'd ask for a section to be redone to see that they could take direction well. It really allowed me to just focus on can they learn, and does their work get better with notes? And if on that rock I can actually build the foundation from. So.
Sweet, thank you.
No problem. Yes, sir. Okay.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for your talk. I guess I just had a question, a clarification. You mentioned cinematic dummies, right? And I just to make sure I understand what you were putting down there. Obviously, the top-down perspective of all the Larian games, that presents a problem when you kind of need to transition into the kind of like the cinematic perspective. And so the solution then was creating a dummy, which is essentially a replication of your scene without all the problematic art assets that you could then use for the cutscene itself. Is that right?
No, just not the problematic art assets, just the characters themselves. Oh. So we could have, you could have the gameplay character standing here, and then you could have the cinematic character actually like talking to the audience and that sort of stuff. And so we created these like little micro desyncs, and we tried to keep them as close as possible, but it allowed the cinematic team to have a character they were controlling, and then the scripting and gameplay team to have a character they were controlling. And then when you were in a cinematic, you were seeing the cinematic dummy, but not the gameplay character, and vice versa.
Okay, so it's less to do with the scene, more to do with the characters itself.
Yes, correct.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hello, I have a much less serious question.
Oh, okay.
I think it was update 2 or 3 where they added the extra leaning down for romantic partners to kiss the player character.
Yeah, yeah.
They're gnomes or halflings. My question is, 1, why wasn't that in the main game? And 2, what was the reaction when you realized you didn't put it in there?
So there's like there are technical reasons and that sort of stuff. There was there's some of that where we actually did the authorship, but the way the ground finding worked like actually kept it from looking right, and so we fixed that. And then there was just mostly what we did in the patch that I think you're mentioning is we added more of them. So we wanted them in the main game, and we thought we did.
Well, thank you for clarifying.
No problem.
You mentioned that one of your core principles was not making the game smaller. And do you still live by that? Should I like quit my job for the next game or something like that? And at what at what point enough is enough?
At what point is enough enough? That's a great question. I'm not going to speculate on that. That is like something that I ask Sven often. But it is always, as always, his question to answer. Sorry.
Hey, I am Jan, and thank you for that very entertaining talk, Jason. I had a question regarding more production and team. So you've shown very vividly the victories you had, the challenges you faced throughout the process. What I was wondering is, especially during COVID, how did you and your team counteract burnout?
Pronouns?
No, burnout.
Burnouts. So there was a little bit of working in the EU. There's actually limitations on like how many days in a row people can work and that sort of stuff. That certainly helps. This was one of the things where, like, I was talking about, like, all of our custom nodes and all of our tracking and this kind of thing. This eventually led to, I didn't want it to become a spreadsheet kind of demonstration, because I'm not a producer, but I do look at a lot of spreadsheets. We were able to predict how long we thought it would take cinematic artists to chew through their work, and if they were working at a good pace, we would make sure that we would kind of, we sent them home sometimes. It was something where I wanted, I had some long hours when I was coming up in the industry, and I wanted better for my team. So we tried to look after them in that way by really having a clear idea on how long it should take them to get things. And then if they were taking too long, we would sometimes they would protest, but we would redistribute the work to other team members who were moving ahead. So that's how we took it very personally.
Very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jason. So super informative talks. Thanks so much for sharing the information. So I too work for RPG games, RPG single-player games. So I'm wondering, you mentioned a lot about the staging, and I really like the staging for Baldur's Gate. So I'm just wondering who are responsible for those staging? Like, are designers or writers, do they also like contribute to how scenes are staged, like lit, or like how are they composed, implemented?
So our director of world building, Farang, like once said, that you can look at no part of Baldur's Gate 3 and point to something that 30 people didn't touch. So they'll be, like, for the most part, cinematics would read and be inspired by the work of writers and come up with the staging plan, but sometimes the writers would have specific ideas, or you would gather ideas from the level design itself. As far as like the standard staging, that was mostly the cinematic leadership, because we needed to make sure that we had alignment on what the standard setup was going to be and what the goals were, and then the rest of the team got to implement and use those.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks so much, and also thanks so much for bringing out such a beautiful experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. First of all, thank you. Second of all, I have a very serious question. So with the Valentine's Day update, not Ascended Astarion got less kiss animations than other characters. So how are you going to fix this, this ground injustice?
I mean, this goes back to how much is enough, right? It's something that, yeah, I have no good answer for this. Bye.
Yeah, thank you anyways.
Thank you.
You said something so profound. You said you as a lead don't worry about delivering the story, but you unblock the rest of the team so that they can create the story. And I wanted to know how that type of communication actually went between the departments involved with that type of mentality geared towards that.
Well, so it's funny. So I have a twin brother, and he's here at GDC. And so the joke is like, now all my team get to meet him and figure out which one of us is the evil twin. And everybody at Larian knows it's me. Because unblocking would take confrontation. It would take some real talk with some of the other collaborators, and we would do that on a director level, and that's how we arrive at consensus and something that would work for their team and would work for my team as well. Yeah, I think it did take like some of the folks that joined the cinematic teams from other cinematic pipelines that had shipped games before. It kind of took them a while to get used to me like not having something to say about everything they were doing, because I wanted them to. They needed to grow, and there's a kind of a term. This is one of my weird terms of compatible mutation. You want everybody to invest in a little of their own creativity in something. And as long as it's not going in the wrong direction, it works. If a plant is seeking the sun, it won't die. So you have to make sure that it's seeking the sun. And that's when you would choose whether or not I would intervene on something. Was it veering off course? Or was it working well? And if it could be clearer, that's where I would typically intervene. But if it was just like, I didn't want the team to try and play the song that only I could hear, because the game was too big for that.
Mm-hmm. And then how did you handle the more difficult conflicts? Like maybe you had somebody that was stubborn and was like, no, I want to tell this specific story, and this is all I want to tell, and you're like, eh.
A lot of times it's the communicative goals. Like it goes back to analysis. What is this scene about? And then if we make the conversation about what the scene is about, then we can arrive at a consensus on what the execution should be. But you have to go back to core principles, and that's something that I pushed a lot with the team. So there weren't many, there was no loggerheads with my team that I can remember. Maybe they disagree.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the genuinely most funny session. This GDC is amazing. And it's also always wonderful to get to see that it's truly an iterative process, riddled with all these things. How did you get your player community to be so tolerant of what's going on in the cinematics, some of these funky things going on in the background, until everything gets patched up?
They were just with us. They had us. Like they supported us. Like our community and I inherited a wonderfully trusting community from the Divinity franchise and all the stuff that they had already done. So I got very lucky with that. But I don't know what makes them so awesome. But thank you for being awesome.
Awesome. Amazing talk. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you for making Baldur's Gate 3. I was also impressed by the comment where your job was to unblock the team and allow their creativity to thrive. I'm curious if you have advice for people who are not lead level, not managers, for when their managers are overstepping, or where they would like to try to involve or bring that culture to their own studios.
I think it depends, right? There are two truisms that I've found about that has applied to my whole career. And the first is reward for good work is more work. And you can never be right at the wrong time. And sometimes you're in a situation like that where you know in your bones this is right, but the universe is like nobody's feeling that need yet. Nobody's hungry for what that truth is. Sensing whether or not that's the case. And I also know that expending a lot of energy trying to make it the right time when it's the wrong time, you can burn a lot of political capital that way. So tread lightly with that. If you can, have a conversation about those initial principles. What are the communicative goals? If you just feel that a good kickoff keeps notes from feeling punitive. Because if you have an agreement on what the scene's about, again, it's just kind of talking about how clear are your artistic decisions in making the point of that scene. And if you've lost your way in that conversation with your lead, bringing it back to that and making sure that you're on board and aligned with what their goals are is typically going to be where you're going to find that collaboration.
Amazing. Thank you.
Cool. All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great GDC.